Addiction to Purpose with Riches in Recovery welcomes you to our audience. We hope that you enjoyed today's show and will join the discussion by dropping a review or comment. It would be tremendous if you would like, rate, and share our content, or even subscribe to our channel. Please be aware that not all conversations on the show are suitable for children. Additionally, we may talk about things such as sexual abuse, domestic violence, and drug or alcohol abuse. If you feel that these things may trigger you, please do not tune in. Finally, if you are a heavy daily user of alcohol or drugs and are considering quitting, please consult a medical professional for assistance. Welcome to the conversation. Hi, I just wanted to come on and just give a little bit of an update. The last few months of producing this show have been just absolutely phenomenal. It's been really rewarding to be here and share with you guys. And if you've been here since the beginning, thank you so much for being here. And if you're new, I'm just really glad that you've arrived. And I just wanted to say thank you. And I wanted to mention that we need your help. You know, if you've come to the show or if you've been with us and you don't subscribe, please do. And like, share, comment on YouTube. That would really help us out. If you could rate and review the show on Apple and Spotify, that would be incredible. And if you find us on Facebook and Instagram and you could join our pages, that would also help us out. It means so much for us to be able to share and for our guests to be able to share their stories with the world and to come to you with their experiences and put them out there, because the one thing that we've really learned in recovery is that our experiences help others. And I strongly feel that my experiences in recovery can help others in and out of recovery, because the truth is that as humans, we all experience a lot of the same things. You will see us make tweaks and improvements with the show as we grow as producers, as creators. And at the end of the day, I'm just so grateful to be able to produce this show, to get to do this and have the opportunity to be with you guys on a weekly basis. And I just really thank you guys. And I am so glad that this is part of my sobriety program. So thank you and keep watching. And I'm just so grateful. Thank you. Hi, welcome to another episode of Addiction to Purpose. Today we're going to talk about the practice of Stoicism, and I have dabbled a little bit. I read a little bit in the morning and try to get some inspiration, and we have a friend that's joining us today that has a little bit more experience with it, but I should say that neither of us are collegiate experts by any means. So we're really just a couple dudes that take interest in it and like reading what people before us have written and gaining some daily inspiration from those things. And, you know, so you guys know me. I'm Rich G, and across the way, yeah, Rich V. And so we're the Riches in Recovery. And today we have my friend Troy with us. Troy, say hello to the audience and share your sober date.
Hey folks, Troy M. Sober date, I'm an alcoholic. Sober date is 5 February 2023.
Great. And we have our little grateful backdrop behind us where everybody that's on the show shares something that they're grateful for. So what are you grateful for today?
It's a couple of things.
You're allowed to write more than one.
So what I would say is I'm really grateful for all of the things that brought me to the point where I'm at today. Self-awareness, I think, is another thing that I'm really grateful for, because it's something that I really didn't have before, and I feel like a lot of the other things stem from my self-awareness. So those are the things that I'm grateful for.
Right on. Very cool.
Yeah, you can write that later, because that might take up half the time.
And my handwriting is horrible, so
That's okay.
I have to take my time so people can read it.
Yeah, I should have been a doctor. Handwriting as well.
So the first question that we have today is, do you mind telling us just a little bit about how substance abuse has impacted your life? So you said alcoholic, so how alcohol has impacted your life?
Sure. So I think for the most part, I was not really aware of my surroundings, my interactions with what I will say is just the world, like relationships. Um, it would get to a point where I just had a lack of presence in all things. And then when there's a lack of presence, there's all these ramifications that happen. Relationships go away because the person that I'm with, whether it's a partner or a friend or something of that nature, um, they just get tired of it. And I'm still in a position where I'm like, well, it's not my fault. It's got to be, something else that's going on because I'm not even cognizant of what I'm doing. It For me, alcohol was like a reinforcer of what I would call maladaptive behaviors, or what in traditional AA is character defects. These are the things that I've been trained in since I was a kid. So birth parents, parents of origin, everybody does their best to raise you. There isn't a book. These are the things that happen. Compounded through teenage years, joining the military. The military raised me in a very particular way that applies to a very particular situation that doesn't necessarily speak to the rest of the world. So yeah, I have all of these behaviors that I've learned that aren't necessarily conducive to what I would call relationships to where I'm present and I'm an equal partner in, whether that's a friend or just somebody that I'm talking with on the street. So yeah, I think the alcohol part for me, it takes away that awareness, and for me, it was harder for me to actually recognize the things that I was doing. I still do that in sobriety. For me now, it's like emotional sobriety. Those are the things that I'm really working on. Those are the things that the maladaptive behaviors are the things that I have to unlearn. And I'm learning more adaptive behaviors. Like people in recovery are helping raise me where I feel like mentally I'm still 16, 17 years old, even though physically I'm 53, almost 54.
Now, let me interrupt a second. Now, alcoholics, we are really, really good at being selfish, and when we're in our disease, we're thinking of ourselves first, and everyone else comes well after ourselves when it comes to being in our disease. Did you find yourself being that way? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I was oblivious to that, which is selfish in its own right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not cognizant of my actions or my behaviors and how it impacts on somebody else. Like I don't take into account feelings, or I didn't take into account feelings or reactions to things that I said, or because I say things this way, it means this, therefore everybody has to understand that, and if they don't, something's wrong with them. That's me being selfish.
Absolutely.
I just, again, lack of awareness of that, so I'm not even able to make any sort of adjustments because maladaptive behaviors multiplied by alcohol, that type of stuff. So yeah, it's, selfishness. I think that's one and the same. I still practice selfishness, but I try to do it in a more positive manner. To me, my sobriety is the most important thing to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I refer to it like it's my toy. And when there are certain situations that might arise that could impact my toy, my sobriety, I'm going to take my toy and I'm going to go elsewhere.
It's got to be number one.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely.
Nice. Sorry to interrupt you there. You were on a roll.
Yeah, no, I think for me that ties in and it explains a lot. It's like you said, it's the core fundamental of an alcoholic is being selfish, and I have to learn how to do that in a more positive way. Positive for the folks that are around me who choose to spend time with me.
Do you enjoy it? Being able to give back and do for others?
I do. I've learned how to do that without expecting something in return. Again, being selfish, right? It's like, what's in it for me if I do this?
Yeah.
that's another maladaptive behavior. It's like, well, I'm doing this because I want to look good, or I have an expectation, and I'm learning to just do things just to do them, right?
Nice.
And if I don't have an expectation of anything in return, there's not going to be an issue when those expectations aren't met, if that makes any sense. Like, if I don't have an
Absolutely.
expectation, I don't have a disappointment.
Yeah, that's great.
And it does. I mean, it's kind of like sharing my story in like a meeting, right? This is what happened. And because I used to struggle with that. I was like, you know, people don't want to hear what I have to say. But I flip it on its head where, like, some people that I've listened to, something has resonated with me. Whether I realize it at that particular moment or not, if I'm reflecting on like the meeting or what was said later, which I'm doing more and more of because, you know, that's part of the program, right? It's like that daily reflection. It's like, hey, you know, I can understand what that person is saying, or even like, hey, they're in a situation that I don't know how I would be able to handle that. And if they can handle that type of a situation, I really don't have a leg to stand on. My complaints aren't as large as I make them to be.
Yeah, yeah, we learned that pretty quick when we find out how the deepest depth that a lot of us get to
Yeah.
before they can find their way up. Yeah, some people have really come down, go all the way down, the lowest lows. Some people in my family that have had to drag themselves up from very, very low lows. So yeah, yeah.
Yep. Absolutely, super relatable. I mean, I think that for me, we were kind of talking before the show started about that obliviousness where I would, even when I would do good, there was always a part of me that was doing that good for me. And the drinking played that role where I could ignore that part of me that knew it was for me and just move on with my life, right? And so I could drink away any emotion that would begin to tell me that I was being selfish or anything like that. It would keep me in that oblivion. So I didn't have to come to terms with anything. And that's part of how I used alcohol, was to keep me from having to confront anything that may be resulting from those maladaptive behaviors. Whether it be somebody approaching me or me just that thought late at night that maybe I hadn't done the right thing, well, I could just drink about it and it would go away. So, very relatable. I feel like there's some misunderstanding when it comes to being a Stoic. I feel like a lot of people kind of think of somebody as being Stoic as somebody being emotionless. So I don't feel like it's that. So what does being the practice of Stoicism, what does it mean to you? How would you translate it?
Yeah, for me, and again, like you pointed out, it's, oh, he's a Stoic, he doesn't have any emotions. For me, that's not the end state. It's not that I don't have any emotions. It's recognizing that I do have emotions, and oftentimes they're referred to, negative emotions would be referred to as kind of passions, really. It's like the knee-jerk reaction, something that you feel really strong about. Stoicism for me is, one, recognizing that I have emotions, understanding what those emotions are. Are they reactions to trauma? Is it the core fundamental human fight or flight type response? That's the core part of it, right? And then we get trained on all of the other stuff. It's really having an interaction with something or someone in the world, recognizing that I potentially have a response, understanding if that response is positive, neutral, or negative. There's very few moments where a negative response is the right response. When it boils down to it, it's protection of life and limb, right? A negative response is really protecting yourself. All other things, it doesn't really equate to like something that needs to be done. So it's really taking an assessment of those emotions and saying, hey, is it neutral or positive? And if so, what's the impact of exercising that verbally? I exercise that on my face a lot. I'm a horrible poker player. Just what's that response going to put out into the world that I'm interacting with? And if it's positive or neutral, great. And if it's negative, really take an assessment and try to figure out what's going on and allowing that ability to say, I'm either going to or I'm not going to do it. Because, when I was in non-sobriety, whether it's alcohol or what I think my larger issue is the emotional sobriety part, my reactions are like that.
Yeah.
So Stoicism, for me, and I equate the practice of Stoicism with like any 12-step program. It's very similar. Stoicism existed before this thing that was called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. But if you dive into Stoicism, you're gonna recognize a lot of things are similar.
Yeah.
And in fact, when I was going through an outpatient program, we're talking about CBT. I'm like, this is just Stoicism, but a different name.
Yeah.
And it's like the 12 steps are similar, only Stoicism doesn't explicitly talk about like substance abuse.
Yeah.
But it's like emotional abuse, or it's a guide to how to do things in life in general. Traditional 12-step AA program is the same thing, really. When I take parts because there's so many intertwined pieces that it's like there's things that I use from a traditional 12-step program. There's non-traditional. There's a gentleman that wrote a book called Staying Sober Without God. And the 12 steps are rewritten without this 3-letter word in it.
Yeah.
Because some people just can't get over the God thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's the same kind of stuff. It's just repackaged for use for somebody else who could use it.
Sure.
And I feel like Stoicism is the same thing.
Yeah.
Does it help you tend to pause before you react?
It's getting there, yes.
Yeah.
But it's and again, it's a practice
progress,
thing.
right.
It's the saying from the traditional AA. It's practice, not perfection.
Because traditionally, us alcoholics, and I will say for myself, I shouldn't be talking for anyone else. Normally, first thought's the wrong thought. So if I give myself that quick second to pause, normally the second thought's the right thought, and make my decisions that way. I mean, I don't always have to, if something's pretty, right there, easy to make a decision about or something like that, that's easy to make a decision. I don't have to pause. But when it comes to something serious, something that means a lot to me, I make sure I pause. I've had to learn how to do that. Before it was really emotional and normally fear-based, how I would react to, important things in life. Even at work, I learned that there are times where even though I'd been doing it forever, years and years, if I didn't know what the outcome was going to be, my response was at a fear base, instead of taking that second pause and making the educated decision. Or the decision of love, from a loving standpoint. And that's how I live my life now, or try to, practice, not progress, not perfection. But I try to live my life through a loving standpoint while making all decisions. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and so I kind of equate that to like muscle memory, right? You've done this for so long, it's hard to not do it. So I have to unlearn 52 years of, it's like physical exercise. It's hard as hell because you haven't done it. Once you learn how to do it, it's easy. But you gotta learn how to do it. it's also hard to unlearn it.
Mm.
So the unlearning part is those maladaptive behaviors. It's
Right.
like the rut that a wagon wheel goes in. You know, it's hard to get out of that rut, but once you get out of that rut, it becomes easier. The
Smooth
first,
sailing.
yeah, the first couple of times where there's certain areas of my life where I had to pause and I had to just leave things be and let them happen. That was the most intense and the hardest period of my life. And that's another thing with Stoicism too. It's right. In my practice of Stoicism, the only thing that I have control over myself, or the only thing that I have control over, is myself.
Yep.
And once I act, I don't even have control over what happens after that, because it's Rich is going to do what Rich is going to do. I'm going to make a statement.
Yeah.
He's either going to hear it, not hear it. He can respond to it, not respond to it. As much as I want to take credit for being able to read people's minds,
Nope.
99 million times out of a billion, I'm going to get my guess wrong. But previously, I would still make that guess, and I would fixate on that guess. And my expectation is he's going to go left, and he goes up, and I'm pissed off because he didn't do what I can't control.
Right. You can make a plan, but don't plan the outcome.
The concept that all the various philosophies kind of align for the same goal is something that is becoming more and more prevalent to me because of the program that I do in the morning, because I just touch a little bit of everything, like every single morning I do. And so you really see where, but the thing that differs between all of them is that they're just meant for a different audience. But they ultimately, the philosophy is the same. Ultimately, right? Between the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the book of Narcotics Anonymous, the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, the Bhagavad Gita, the parables of Buddha, the Daily Stoic, all of them have such alignment. I mean, you mentioned something earlier, and I just read a passage in the Bhagavad Gita the other day that said your responsibility is to your duty, but you have no, how to say it? Your responsibility is to your duty, but you have no right to the fruits of your labor, right? So you do what you're supposed to do, and then you don't expect anything for what you've done. But that's a thought in Stoicism. That's a thought in the Bible. That's a thought in AA. That's a thought. And and who's your audience? And it goes all the way back to like Roman and Greek literature, that those things based on mythology, or back to the Old Testament and the Bible based on Israeli mythology, if you will, they're all written to an audience saying like, hey, these are the philosophies of how to live life. And it's just written for an audience and written by a different dude for a different audience. And they're all great rules to live by that kind of great minds think alike, right? They all arrive upon, I'm not saying that they all say exactly the same thing, but they all have a very common thread.
Well, they all make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you read them and you remove your emotion from the equation and you just apply, like, if you're on the receiving end of them and you apply that thought to them, then you're like, yeah, I would rather be on the receiving end of that concept, Well,
it's like we all have our own view into the same world.
Right.
But our views are different. It doesn't change the world. The world stays the same. It's just our perception and our interpretation of the world. It's like even the Stoic quotes that I read all the time, and the argument can be said about the Bible, and the argument can be said about the Quran. One of the big things in the Quran is it needs to be maintained in the original language to the point where it gets fanatic. Like an English translation of the Quran, in some people's mind, is a horrible thing because the word is this, and nobody can change the word.
Yeah.
Well, Same with Stoicism, right? Originally, it could be written in Greek or Latin,
Yeah.
and before the time of Christ, all these translations take place. By the time I think I'm reading what Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius said, it's been translated by a whole bunch of different people who tend to put their own
Yeah.
interpretation on it. I almost use the word spin because that's the former pessimist in me. But that's what it is, right? But it's one's own understanding and their translation of what it is that they're looking at.
No question. You hear a lot when you interact with or listen to people from other countries, and they'll say a word and then they'll say, well, there is no direct English translation for this word. And that definitely traces back to ancient Greek, ancient Roman, Sanskrit, all of these things where these ancient texts or scriptures were written. There is not a translation. There is not a literal translation for the word. There are like 5 translations that kind of describe what it's talking about. And so, yeah, that's definitely a difficulty for modern, I guess, anthropologists and things of that nature that are trying to do these translations. And
Well, heck, oh, sorry.
and they're trying to put themselves in the shoes, almost like what I was alluding to before. Like, okay, who was the audience that this was being written to? What was the situation? There's no way to be in that moment. So it really is almost a best guess. This is what I think they were trying to say.
Well, yeah, you think of it, you have these ancient writings and you're trying to decipher them, a couple thousand years later. But you go ahead and you watch a movie that was in Korean and they dub it over in English, and then you write the subtitles. They have the subtitles, and the English is different than the subtitles.
Yeah.
And even in that translation, that little bit of translation, it's different.
Yeah.
So it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. And I think that's where you just apply a little bit of, you get out of your brain and you go to your heart and you go like, okay, how's this feel?
Keep it simple.
And you kind of go that way. At least that's what I try to do.
And the audience thing that you pointed out, that's an important thing to understand too. One of my favorite, air quotes, Stoics, and there's still discussion as to whether he claimed to even be a Stoic, is Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah.
His book, well, it's not even his book. Meditations is literally his diary.
Yeah.
And for me, I feel like if he knew that we were reading his deepest, darkest thoughts and his reflections on the day, he'd be freaked out because he's doing. This is journaling for Marcus. This is literally him trying to deal with how he interacted with the world and how he could get better. And even in some of the meetings that I go to where there's discussion on some of his thoughts, it's like, oh, I'm pissed off at Marcus because he told me this. He's telling me what to do. And sometimes I want to just remind folks, Marcus is only telling himself. All this other stuff, you're taking this in personally. He doesn't even know you.
Right.
He wrote this stuff to himself 2,000 years ago. And when you were a teenager, say, for example, if this was a female that was talking about this, if you had a diary as a kid, how would you feel if somebody broke in and started reading your diary?
No doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're writing something very personal about like how you felt in this particular situation, and then all of a sudden, 10 years later, somebody's reading it. I mean, not obviously many years later, but still, yeah,
Or you felt about this person, or yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that kind of touched on my next question. I knew that you were gonna, because we know each other. I figured you might say Marcus Aurelius, but I was gonna ask if there was a particular Stoic or philosopher that you felt fond of or a particular connection to.
Yeah, and it's Marcus because again, this is not him professing to be anything other than he's just writing stuff for himself. This is like he's walking the walk. And if somebody else can gain something from it, great. But this is really for himself because Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor. He's really trying to be the best emperor and the best person that he could possibly be.
Yeah.
And he's not waving the advertisement or the flag, you know, it's like AA. It's not advertisement, but it's attraction.
Right.
You know, and you know, there's great examples. Epictetus was a Stoic philosopher, but he was a slave,
Right.
and he had a bum leg. Like he had a limp. And some of the things that, you know, Epictetus puts out, if this person who is a slave can go through what this person went through and still have the mentality that he had, that's a powerful thing to me. And so I reflect on things like that, and I'm like, my stuff is nothing compared to this person's stuff. So these are the things that I can take in and I can work on and better myself for. Yeah, so Marcus is my favorite. I still have personality clashes because I guess, for lack of a better term, my emotional sobriety. Seneca. So one of the books that I read is The Daily Stoic. There's like, there is an excerpt that's put for every day. Seneca is quoted a lot. Sometimes I take exception with Seneca because he was Nero's teacher, mentor.
Yeah.
And we know how that worked out.
Yeah.
But again, that's me putting my twist on things, compounded by the fact that there's a movie that's out in Europe where John Malkovich plays Seneca. So I know how Malkovich has been in other movies, and I put that personality on Seneca, who happens to be Nero's advisor, and I'm just like, Troy, stop it.
Right.
But that's the addict brain in me going batshit crazy, right? It's
sure.
like, this is my perception of how things are. So I'm going to take exception with anything that Seneca says because I'm not looking at the words.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You're looking at John Malkovich.
Exactly. Well, it's you know, Cyrus the Virus, I guess, and you know, all the other characters that he's portrayed. But yeah.
So you kind of you spoke to this some. How do you feel that this practice translates to the work you do for your recovery? Is there anything that you'd add, like specifically to that thought? I mean, we've kind of covered.
Yeah,
It's
quite well, actually.
It's pretty. It's so wrapped in like AA principles, whether it's secular or non-secular. It's crazy. It's, you know, it's my recovery program. I don't.
It's what you get out
I
of
don't
it.
do the 12 steps because I feel like in my mind, my practice, whether I label it Stoicism, secular 12 steps, non-secular 12 steps, it is whenever I have an interaction with the world, I am practicing all of those steps. I want to get to the point where I'm practicing all 12 of those or all X number of those steps for every single interaction.
That's where you're supposed to get to.
Yeah. So we talk about the muscle memory, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to go through it the first time. You know, there's this elephant and I gotta eat it. And I'm like, I gotta eat it in one bite. And it's like, no, you gotta do it the first time. You gotta take little bites of it. And then when you learn how to do that, you can do it again. You're more familiar with it. It becomes easier. Lather, rinse, repeat to the point where, you know, I'm not at the point where every time I move or react or anything like that, nor do I kid myself that I'm ever going to get to that point of perfection. But I'm still practicing to try to get to that point.
Right. Sure.
Like we have a conversation. I'm going to go back later and I'm going to reflect on these things. I'm going to say, hey, was everything that I did and I said appropriate for that type of thing? Do I need to go back? Do I need to make an adjustment, an amends, however you want to call this thing? I do my meditation, which in some people's dialect is prayer. I'm not necessarily a God person, but I can't and I haven't convinced myself that all of this is an accident.
Yeah.
Something had to happen. So somewhere between the accident and I don't know, intelligent design, whatever discussion point that somebody wants to put at it, I'm working through that stuff. One of the things that I've learned in recovery is I say no a lot less, and I try to afford things multiple opportunities. It's like meetings that I go to. I've tried a recovery Dharma meeting. It didn't work that one particular time, but I want to go back and because it could be a bad day.
Mhm.
Could have been the wrong topic. The host
Yeah.
could have just, this, that, or the other thing. I'd go to the well a couple of times until I go, okay, well, that just doesn't work for me. So at least I tried it. Whereas before, shit, even AA meetings, no, I didn't need that.
Right.
You see where that gets us.
Yeah, with faith
Right.
in something better, it's just going to make you a stronger person.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it. You're not doing anything bad to yourself or anyone else. But having faith, into something better, it's just, I don't know. There's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
I don't know why people are hesitant, thinking there might be something better.
Well, I mean, I'm very much to each his own on the whole
I know.
subject, right?
And absolutely, I am too.
But
I
I've
am
just
too.
I've just landed on 3 words. I don't know. And that's my answer. I mean, I have faith. I believe there is, and I don't know. And
Yeah.
that's
And
the extent of it.
I didn't mean it like that,
I don't
as-
know.
I didn't mean it in a
Yeah,
point
no,
where
I know, I
someone's lousy because they might not have faith.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
But I think for me it was very detrimental for years to try to know. But
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think it
No,
hurt
and
me,
it's for me, it's the control part, right?
Yeah.
I have to control everything. Whereas
Yeah,
like
that
my
is
higher
exactly
power
it.
right now
right here.
is like everybody that is a part of my program, whether they're in the program or not. Because I have friends that aren't in the program, but they bring experience, like they're true friends. Like my circle of friends, if you'll indulge me a little bit, back when I was not in recovery, it's like Facebook, right? You've got 12 million of these things that you're calling friends, and you just have one circle. Well, in recovery, now I have what are called spheres of influence. And the people that I truly, truly love and appreciate, I'm finding there's a handful of those. They're in my closest circle of influence. And some of the people that aren't there, I haven't gotten rid of them. They're just a little further out. Like there's things that I'm just not going to offer up. I'm not going to trust with those people. It doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means that my daily interaction with my core group, those are the folks that are just really part of my fundamental world.
Yeah.
And everybody else certainly has an opportunity to be a part of the larger world of Troy. And in recovery, when I get to be honest with myself and I meet somebody like Rich and I say, this is me. This is me, warts and all. Would you like to be a part of that world? And if you say no, okay. We spent that short period of time getting to know each other, establishing those truths, and there's no expectation. It's different than I'm pre-recovery. I go through a relationship that's built up over 14 years because I have these preconceived notions, and I get to a point in that relationship where it's decided that that relationship no longer needs to be. That's a very deeply emotional disconnect because I haven't been honest with myself. I haven't been honest with that person, and there's resentments that are built up because of those, for lack of a better term, I'm just going to use dishonesty and misaligned expectations. I'm not getting that return, so I'm pissed off at that person. I wasn't upfront and I wasn't honest in the first place, and I didn't maintain that upfrontness and honesty. So that's where I'm trying to get to in my world of recovery, picking and, taking resources from all of the programs that have been exposed to me so far. I'm sure there's more that's out there. I'm not going to say no to. I used to say no a lot, and it didn't get me, well, it got me to where it got me.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is not where I now understand I want to be.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Now, did you guys get sober together? I mean,
No.
no. Okay.
No.
Okay.
No. So I went through the outpatient program in Azure. That was
Okay.
my first foray into the recovery process. So I didn't do the in-person. But like I said, Azure Acres, I'll advertise them until the cows come home. They're an integral part of how I got to be where I am. Even the stoicism part, like I wasn't really into stoicism. Like I'd get the email every once in a while because I signed up for some newsletter or whatever, and I'd read like this once every, I don't know, 4 months. Because I don't know, maybe I was showing off, I'm stoicism or whatever. But when the counselors there, they were like, well, let's start looking at meetings. And I went to this one website or whatever it was, because I had gone to a couple of in-person meetings. They were great. I just didn't vibe with them. And then I stumbled across this Zoom meeting that had Daily Stoic in the title of it. And I went to that meeting, and then I went every day. And then I had a service commitment there. I was one of the hosts. They do meditation. It's a 7-day-a-week thing. They do a 10-minute meditation in the opening after they read like the daily ponderance from the Daily Stoic. We do a 10-minute meditation. On Saturdays, it's a musical meditation. All of the other days, it's just a pretty silent meditation.
A lot of drunks doing meditation together is strong.
Right.
Yeah. It's awesome.
But I did the hosting for the Saturday meeting. So, I put together the music that was done through the 10-minute meditation. And, sometimes you would get the snarky request, hey, I want Metallica. I'd go look for a meditation appropriate Metallica, which happened to be like a symphony is playing Metallica.
Yeah.
And it got to be like, it was almost like a Stump the Chump type competition where they would give me these oddball requests, and I'd go find something. I would spend the whole week just looking for it. And I mean, it brought me to a point where it served me very well, and I don't participate in that 7 days a week. I'm not a host. In fact, I might go once a week now. I'm exploring other options, but it gave me like my foundation. And I wouldn't have found that meeting if it wasn't for Azure, and if it wasn't for, the timing of whatever it is. It's like, even in the traditional, the miracles happen. Whatever you want to call it, those things fell in line all at the right time. And regardless of where my rock bottom was, the most positive things came from it at the exact moment that it needed to be. And it's mind-numbing to me when I look back on those things and I'm like, the things that had to, it took me 53 years, but you know what? I'm grateful for all of those things that happened up until that 53 years because, I'm in a different spot.
You can appreciate it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It took me till I was 50 till I got sober.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of my questions was, how do you use the group as your higher power? So you covered that really well, and I appreciate that. Because I think that's something that our audience can use, because there are so many people that don't want to apply to the, big guy with a gray beard in the sky. And I think
I say big guy upstairs.
Yeah, well, big guy with a gray beard in the sky, big white guy in the sky, whatever you want to go to that is a misrepresentation of what might be up there, I very seriously doubt that it's a Father Time looking guy, hanging out up there
You
with
never
sandals
know.
on. I do not know. That is that is my
never
genuine
know.
answer. I do
have
not know.
no
It could
idea.
very well be. But I think that first concept of group as a higher power, that was my very first concept of what I had to go to, because I was not. I was always kind of like there's something, but quite frankly, I didn't even want to deal with the something, because I had just been so jaded by religion over the years that I just didn't want anything to do with it. And I've moved away from that now. But the last kind of list of questions before we get into the final last couple was, do you have a quote that you wanted to share with us? And I see you brought today's Daily Stoic. Did you have a couple other quotes?
I have a couple. In
that
fact,
you're actually yeah.
Marcus
Came
Aurelius.
Yeah.
Marcus Aurelius. Like, this is literally my favorite quote. So in his meditations, he writes, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one."
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
this can
I
be
love that
translated
one.
into nowadays. It could be, what a good person
No,
should
I've
be.
heard that one. That's a great one.
And again, this is just this is not him telling anybody but himself. He's telling himself, why am I arguing over, what this is? I'm just going to do this, and that's enough for me. Just
Gosh darn it.
kind of an example on like the Daily Stoic quotes, and Ryan Holiday put that book together. It's interpretations, and it's a daily reading. So I want to give Ryan Holiday his credit. So for today's reading, it's focused on what is yours alone, and this is from Epictetus, from the Enchiridion, which has been described to me as, a guide to how to be like a dude. Like when people complain about there's no instruction manual, it's been articulated that the Enchiridion for a guy is like, that's about as good as you can get.
Man manual.
The manual, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Manual.
Forgive me for saying the manual for guys.
Yeah.
Again, this is Epictetus. This is just the way that it was thousands of years ago.
The patriarchy started a long time ago.
So
right? Yeah.
What I would just ask is, look past the patriarchy and just kind of take the concepts. But what he says, and again, Epictetus was a slave who was lame. So these are the things that he talks about or he teaches. So he says, "Remember then, if you deem what is by nature slavish to be free, and what is not your own to be yours, you will be shackled and miserable, blaming both gods and other people. But if you deem as your own only what is yours, and what belongs to others is truly not yours, then no one will ever be able to coerce or stop you. You will find no one to blame or accuse. You will do nothing against your will. You will have no enemy. No one will harm you, because no harm can affect you." And that's basically, him saying, focus on what's yours. You can only control your world. And for a person who has been enslaved and indentured, that's a powerful thing for me. And Ryan Holiday gets into a story about James Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and how he kind of focused on that type of a mentality to get him through the trials and tribulations that he was going through as a POW. But it's like, even when the guy has locked you up and is beating you and barely feeds you, you don't afford that person, you don't give that person, you don't blame that person, because you are in control of yourself. And that's just, to me, that's a mind-blowing thing. So, in the meetings that I go to, we read this, and then there's a 10-minute meditation. And then we share on, hey, does that impact your recovery? If it does, how does it? And things of that nature. And, it's very similar to like an AA meeting where there's
Keep your own house clean.
Yeah, keep your side of the street and keep your side of the street clean, and the rest is for somebody else to deal with. And that's a freeing thing.
Yep. But yeah, if you keep your own house clean, though, then no one can bash you and bash you for your house. It's clean.
This, I mean, in my head, this also kind of ties into the kind of thought that the sort of the thought of impermanence. Like, the only thing that we ever truly own is just what's within us. What's our, the only thing that's truly mine is me. My thoughts, my actions, my beliefs, the things that I hold within me.
Well, that's if your wife lets you out.
Well, so there's this thing, right? Memento mori.
Yeah, right.
You could leave this earth right now. And I wear a ring to remind me of that saying. I used to carry a coin. I have a tattoo that has a Stoicism connotation to it. And it's literally a reminder, I don't know if I'm going to be able to walk out of this door.
Right.
So there's things beyond that I'll deal with when I get there.
Yep.
I used to plan out, and like when I was a kid, I was focused on what happens when I die.
Yeah.
I would fixate on that. What's life after? And then it gradually got better, and it was like I had to plan out all of these things.
Right.
The first two, because their presence are the only things that I could possibly deal with, and I had no idea what the hell was going to happen, and I was wrong 99.999 repeating nines all the time.
Sure.
And it's, I have to sit back and wait for that one thing. What's going to happen? I have to wait for it to happen to see what's going to happen. So then I can go, oh, okay, now how do I deal with it?
Right. Right. Yeah. There is no seeing into the future. Absolutely. All right. So we'll just jump into the final few questions that I like to offer to everybody that's on the show. And the first one is just kind of very open-ended. Is there anything else on your mind that you think you'd like to throw out?
Well, just that, everything that I've mentioned, again, it's a practice for me. I'm getting better. I'm more aware of like communication. I do reflect often on interactions that I have, but I don't want to sound flippant and say or give the impression that this is easy. Recovery is it's the hardest thing I've ever done. I was in the military too, so I've done some pretty wild things when it comes to difficulty or being in some difficult situations. So it's not easy, but it's the muscle memory part. It's not easy because it's new. It's definitely been worth it. And for me, it's really continuing on what I'm going to call is just my emotional sobriety. How to be that better person for myself. For that core group of people that I talk about, but really for myself. Because if I'm that way for myself, I'm that way for everybody else.
Is this your first crack at being sober?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I was in the military, so obviously if I was deployed in certain areas where, drinking wasn't allowed, like I was in Desert Storm, so for 10 months to a year, again, that my addiction isn't necessarily that constant everyday type thing. For me, it's more like a symptom of the larger emotional sobriety thing. That's the recovery part, I think, is the crux of my journey. You do have those thoughts because every addict does. Well, I wonder what it's like. Maybe in 5 years I can have a beer, and then I remind myself I just don't have that ability to do that.
Yeah.
I have all the evidence in the world that I need to tell me and to show me and to prove to me that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
So, I'm human. I do have those thoughts. I do reflect on those thoughts. Living in something that's uncomfortable and just letting it be there, I think is the key for me. It gets easier. It definitely gets easier, like everybody says, because the first little bit, I still wasn't aware. I was in the outpatient program. I was going through all of this stuff, and I'm like, when is this going to happen? Or this just doesn't seem like me. And then I finally, the light bulb went off, and it's like, I mentioned it before. I think we started recording. It was like the numbers that get thrown out in recovery classes. 93% of people are going to relapse, and I'm like, shit. When am I going to relapse? And then I just woke up one day and I'm like, well, Troy, you've been relapsing for 40 some odd years since your drinking career started when you were a kid sneaking alcohol, And it was almost like that 800-pound gorilla was lifted off my shoulder. It was like, okay, so I don't have to be afraid of that because I've lived it and I just didn't recognize it.
Yeah.
So now it's just getting better with relationships is what I'll say, whether they're work relationships, casual relationships. I see somebody on the street that I have a different view of now than I did before. I mean, a lot of things have changed since being in recovery. It's mind-numbing, just
For the better?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's to the point, boundaries are an important thing. I used to get worked up by the news. I just turn it off because it's like, I'll watch local news because I want to figure out what's going on in the weather and I want to figure out what's going on locally. But past that, I'm not getting wrapped up in what's going on in the world of politics because it's not for me. It will take me down that path, that little circling the drain that I used to do when I wasn't in recovery. That will jeopardize my emotional sobriety, and I don't want to go down, and I don't want to be that asshole. I'll say it in meetings. I'm a recovering alcoholic and asshole, and my recovery date from alcohol is by February 23. I'm still working on the other part. And I really, truly, honestly believe that because I'm a different person. I'm not as far along as I want to be, but I know I'll keep progressing towards that. And for me, I think that's just the most eye-opening, great thing. I'm proud of that I'm able to go back and to be able to recognize those changes and continue to make changes.
So far this afternoon with me, you haven't been an asshole once. So you're doing great with me.
It's a reminder, though.
Yeah.
It's hey, I'm an alcoholic and I'm an asshole. I need to do these things.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's part of unlearning the muscle memory.
So somebody recently was kind of making us think about well, why do we have to announce ourselves as alcoholics? I'm like, because we've got to remind ourselves.
You don't have to. You can choose to do whatever you want to do. But for me,
it's important.
If you're new in recovery and you want someone to give you a hand, which if you're new in recovery, you should ask for a hand. You say you're an alcoholic and you just get in the practice of saying you're an alcoholic. It's just part of the shtick.
That's an important thing. I wouldn't ask for help because it was, the army of one, be all you can be.
It's great to ask for help,
and you get help. And it's so much easier. The hardest part is asking for it, and then everything else is easier. The help that you get makes things just so much easier. And even when you don't ask for it, when I'm listening to somebody share and they say something that resonates with me, I'm like, thank you.
Yeah.
And even sharing before, I was like, I don't know that my sharing is going to help anybody. But then I remember the light switch flipped on when so-and-so said this. You can take it for what you want to take it for. if it works, great.
There's somebody.
There you go.
Yep. You may still have something for this, you may not. In the spirit of progress, not perfection, is there something that you've been working on lately? Like, is there something specific, maybe?
I'm all over the place when it comes to that.
Yeah.
It's
That's
really,
why I was laughing.
It's really the emotional sobriety part.
Yeah.
It's because it's very easy. I have an addict brain, and it's very easy to go back for something that is comfortable for me, even when it's like there's comfort in discomfort.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
getting to the point where I don't have to remind myself that I'm a recovering asshole.
Yeah.
That's what I'm working on.
Sure. What's the greatest gift that you have been given recently by recovery?
Man, that's a hard question. Recently. I think it's literally when people share with me their thoughts on anything that I might have shared. Like our last alumni meeting, when people appreciate just me spewing things out the way that I spew things out, and they gain stuff from that. Because that's not solicited, and when you get that, that's a powerful thing. I'll say, and this is not something recent. This has always been, but just the fact that I understand and I recognize that is the people in my life who have stayed with me and supported me, and loved me unconditionally. That is probably the biggest thing. It's not a recent thing, but it's a daily reminder of,
Oh, man.
those people are there.
If it's a recent thing that you get to feel every day that you didn't before,
Yeah.
so it's recent.
Right.
Yeah.
Wake up in the morning and think, people actually like me now, right? Like,
I could recognize that people like me.
Yeah.
They did before.
they did before, but yeah.
And
But you
again,
can
it's
recognize
the doubt in my mind. It's the
No.
perception that I have of how somebody else looks at me or
Yeah.
whatever it is, and I can't worry about that. I have to focus on myself, and then it comes.
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to that. I think I was somewhere between. I was oblivious, right? You used that word earlier. I was oblivious. I was somewhere between. I was oblivious, where if I knew they loved me, I just didn't want them to because I didn't feel like I was worthy of it.
Yeah.
Right. So I was like, I'm better off if you just don't. All right, leave me alone. So
It's easier for you to deal with it that way.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. That was a fun chat.
Yeah.
That was good chat. Thank you.
If you have any questions about today's show or anything else recovery related, feel free to reach out. You can find our contact information in the description of the show, and we'd absolutely love to hear from you. I'd like to thank my buddy Rich
Thank
and
you, Rich.
Troy for
you both.
joining me
Troy
for
did
this
a
show.
great job, man. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Really enjoyed it.
And I'd like to thank our audience for being part of my sobriety today. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. We really hope you got something out of today's episode. We would be honored if you would like and share the episode or leave a comment with your takeaways. Don't forget to subscribe to tune in to future episodes. Have a great day.